Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. If my voice sounds kind of weird, I'm kind of sick, and I'm sorry about that. So, my name is Sara, and I work for Caimo. You may not know Caimo. Caimo is a venture of Rocket Internet. I'm from Portugal. I currently work and reside in Portugal. If you're from Portugal, you have to mention both things, because we usually kind of run away. But I live and work for Rocket Internet in Oporto. Okay, I had the idea for this talk because this year at Caimo we are going to do the revamp of the entire desktop. We already started; it will be done by the end of the year. And there are 3 front ends, and we basically, when we decided what we wanted to use, we just stared at each other longly, like in a romantic movie, and just said we want to use Flexbox. We've used our own grid, and we have used Foundation Grid, and we had a whole bunch of issues that we couldn't fix, mainly with alignments. We had containers, and we wanted to align both spans in it, and it was a mess. We had to use line heights, and as we both know, line heights are not good for aligning things. And I got the idea from this talk because we love it at Caimo. We have used it for the past couple of months, and by now we haven't had a lot of issues. We've been doing great with it. We have classes that align automatically things and stuff like that, and it's just great. A couple of months ago, also found out about CSS Grid, and love it as well. So if you want to find me on the internet, that's my email and Twitter page. And for building layouts in CSS, a long time ago, like 2 years ago, we used a couple of techniques. Okay, the first one that came was tables. I'm going to be straight. I wasn't around when tables started making their way into CSS layouts. I was around when they started to die. So I still got a lot of tutorials with tables, and I still got a lot of table websites, so the full grid was displayed in tables, and let me tell you, tables are like the hardcore version of HTML. They're not good to look at. To this day, they're like long division. Like, you can do amazing things in math, you can go your whole life doing math and really be good at it, but the moment somebody makes you do long division on a piece of paper, you can't do it. Tables are kind of like that. Every time I look at a table right now, I do a thing that I call public transportation phase. I think that everyone who's written public transportation has had this moment. If you write it in the morning, there's always that one person. It's like 8:30 or 9, whatever time you write the public transportation, and there's always this one person in the subway or the train that is just doing something weird. They're either doing something weird, or just being weird, and your brain doesn't function well because you probably woke up 20 minutes ago, you haven't talked, all you've moved was to put your headphones and eat something so you don't pass out on the subway, because that looks bad. You're going to have to call an ambulance in the middle of the subway, and then you're going to be the person that is doing something weird. And that's my face, like this face. Like, you stare at someone like this, you don't understand, your face is just like, what? That's the table face. That's the table face. If you're reading public transportation, you know exactly the face I'm talking about. For many years, we also used floats. That's pretty much when I started, like in the web development business. I started about 3-4 years ago. And we started using floats, and we were happy, kinda. We thought we were happy. Floats worked. Like, they were a hack, but they worked. They had a lot of issues, like you couldn't change the order, so the order that was on the code was the order that was going to be on the screen, and there was absolutely nothing you can do about it. And there was also that one enormous bug where if you floated 2 elements, a container would collapse. Oh my god. Basically, we've used the class clearfix more times than any class ever used in CSS. If there's a statistic, it's going to tell you that. But they worked. They worked. We built the hack to fix the hack, and eventually it worked. It was kind of a recursion and an inception, but it worked. We were kind of happy. Also, for a while, we used the inline-block, but we eventually found out that was not a very good idea and just stuck that with lists and moved on with our lives. A couple of years ago, Flexbox came out. My cat also does that, but I didn't have a GIF of that. And that's not I think that's a portable DVD player. You get the idea. So a couple of years ago, Flexbox came out. And the moment it came out, it didn't grab that much traction because it wasn't really a popular thing. It's mainly because there are 2 things that people think about Flexbox that makes them drive away from using this. They just keep using your own grids. Oh yeah, there's another monitor there. You just keep using your own grids. And one of them is that Flexbox is not supported. How many browsers do you think support it in percentage? Like 50%? Something around that? I'm going to tell you all browsers that support that. All the browsers support Flexbox. Somebody in the back is saying Opera Mini. The browser that doesn't support border radius supports Flexbox. That's something. So basically, all the latest browsers support Flexbox. The latest IE and Edge support that. Beyond that, they kind of do with the old syntax, and then they just don't. So 9 below just doesn't support that. But in general, that's like a 90%. Chrome is used like 50%. In Portugal, you use Chrome like 25%. I don't know why. We all have Androids. That's pretty much the reason. And it amounts about to 90% of the browser users worldwide. Depends on what countries you're using, but in general, that's a pretty good statistic. You don't get a lot better than that. So the other idea is that people have this conception that Flexbox is hard. I think that in life there are two types of things, two types of hard. There are things that are just hard, like you've tried extensively and you have failed, and you feel horrible as a human being because you have failed. And I'm going to give you an example. So a couple of years, I tried doing the UI stuff. Like you go on Pinterest and you see these pretty things and you try them at home and you fail. Like since I've been like 18, so like 5 years. That was long math. 5 years, I've tried extensively and I failed because it's hard for me. I can't do it. I always end up like cutting myself or just getting glue all over and screwing everything up. So I just buy things because I'm a consumerist. I think that's the word. It's hard for me. I've tried and I failed. And I'm pretty sure you have this with languages or frameworks. You've tried them and it's just hard for you. It may not be hard for somebody else. I know people who do the UI every day and it's easy for them. But for you, it's hard. And then there are things that are hard to get your head around. So basically, one thing is like, okay, imagine driving. When you start driving, driving is hard. Like changing your gear is like the hardest thing you've ever seen in your life. If you haven't started driving when you were 13 with your dad. That doesn't count. I only started in the classes. So it was hard. But then when you get your head around it, it's pretty easy. It becomes boring, actually. Then you start driving on the highway and you're bored. You want to fall asleep, but you can't. And you probably also felt this with things like Angular, for example. You don't think Angular is hard now, but when you started Angular, they used a lot of directives. And the directives in the HTML weren't things that we were used to. So they were kind of hard to get our heads around. And I think that's the idea of Flexbox. I don't think Flexbox is hard as a whole. I think it's hard to get your head around because Flexbox works in a different way. So when you use floats or inline-block or things like that, you give your styles to the item. In this case, there's a container and 3 items. And you give your styles to the item. So you float the item to the left. Correct. And but in Flexbox, it's the other way around. So if you want to create a grid inside of the container, you have to assign things to the container. So the grid is created in the container, not on the items. If you want to give something specific to the items, like you want to change their width or something like that, you apply that to the item, but it's something specific to that item. So the grid is created on the container. And that is not something that we are used to, let's be honest. We are used to floating things to the left and everything just works after you apply clearfix to it. This is the part that is hard to wrap your head around. And I think the best way for you guys to learn Flexbox is to watch other people screw up while they code. So when you go home, you're going to remember me screwing up and you're not going to screw up. It's all going to be okay. So I'm going to do a little demonstration of how Flexbox works, like show you all of the basics and stuff like that. So I think it's the easiest way. If I'm going to show you like 500 slides, you're not going to remember the 500 slides. To this, there's video. So let's just come here to Sublime Text. And no, not there. Okay. So all I have is basically simple items, an image. I can try. I can try my best. I have like an entire set at home. But, okay. So, okay. Good? Good? Okay, sorry. Okay, so basically, as you can see, this is pretty standard CSS. This is just to give you an example. And then I have a container that has 3 items in it, 4 items in it. I can't really count. And it has random things. Okay, so that was pretty much just to show you what I had. And this is not needed. So I have this. I'm just going to inspect this element. I'm going to give you a little space right there. Okay, very good. If I type something in here, can you... Oh, yeah, you can. Okay, let's go. Okay, so to set something as a flex container, all you need to do really is to set it to display flex. And as you can see, it automatically builds you an automatic grid. That's not really something that you want to use in your entire life, but it's useful. And you're going to say, yeah, I could do that with floats. Kinda. It would collapse the container, but kinda. Okay, and what do you want to do besides this? Okay, so you want to align every single element to the center. In a vertical way, you want to align it to the center. How do you do this? You used to do this with position absolute and all of those weird hacks. So like 3 lines of position absolute thing was the beauty of CSS. In the flex, you have something called align items, and you type center. And it aligns the item. This is beautiful. I have background, but you get the idea. You can align all the items automatically to the center like this. You also have other options like baseline. You can align it to flex end, that's the end of the axis, flex start, and you have stretch, that's the default one. We're going to keep this to center. And now you say, okay, this is cool, but I don't want it to do the entire width. I wanted each one of these to be like 20%. So, but that's something that you have to give to the item, because that's specific to the items. That doesn't have anything to do with the grid by itself. That's the item that is different. So we're going to go to the item, and we're going to write flex basis, and we're going to write 20%. Flex basis works basically like width. But the difference between flex basis and width is that if you use this as a row, it's width. If you use this as a column, it's height. So that's pretty cool. You can change the order, and it automatically becomes height. Okay, what if you want to set this to 40%? As you can see, it doesn't work. That's because we have 2 things in flex called flex grow and flex shrink. And by default, flex grow is 0. That means that the elements cannot grow besides how big they are in auto mode. Because since in auto mode they were like 15%, they can't grow besides that. So we have to set flex grow to 1. And we have to set flex shrink, that by default is 1 to 0. And as you can see, this screws up the entire thing. There you go. I'm going to go back to that. But as you can see, everything is 40%. By default, flex doesn't wrap the elements inside of the container, because you may not want this. There were cases where I did not want this. But in general, you're going to want this. You're not going to want this to happen. You're going to want things to go like down and do all the pretty stuff. So you're going to come here to the container, and you're going to say flex wrap, and say this is the default, no wrap, and you're going to say wrap. And there you go. Pretty simple grid, right? It's a pretty easy grid that you can build with something that was intentionally built. That was a hard word right there. Intentionally built for grids. It was built for creating layouts and grids and helping you move along through this in a way that is syntaxed. So let's just go back here, and I'm going to set this to 20%, and I'm going to delete these 2. And as you can see, I think I did something not so, there we go. As you can see, this is not aligned to the center. You usually do this, and you set the container to margin auto. In these cases, you can also do something called justify, and what this does is get all of the things that we have inside of the container, like all of the items, and justify those items to the center. As usual, you also have flex end, flex start. I'm going to just show you all the things that we have. Flex end, flex start, space around. That means that it's going to leave a space around everything, and space between. The space around means that it's going to leave some padding on the container, and space between just means between the items. We're going to set this to center, and let's just remove this so it's auto again. And as you can see, this is not very no, we're going to do the other thing. Wait, there we go. Flex base is 20%. As you can see, this is not a hard thing to do. Like, it's hard to get your head around the fact that you have to do pretty much everything with a container. But in general, it's different terminology for the same thing. This is also pretty responsible. If I try to do this, this is responsible. But now you say, okay, so that's cool, but I don't want this to be in a row. I want this to be in a column when I reach 600 pixels. You can also do that. You can change the order of the things and make it into a column. So if I come here and I say, right here, there we go, flex direction, and I say column, it's going to kind of break because of the flex spaces and my screen is pretty small. If I remove this, it's going to work properly. It's the size of the screen. And it changed everything to be like this instead of being like this. That's something that is really great when you're working with mobile websites. This is something that I have used extensively when working with mobile and working with responsive things. And you can also set this to column reverse. That reverses the orders in the column. There's also row and row reverse. That's kind of the size of the screen again. But you get the idea. So column. And so far, so good. I think you got the idea that it's hard to get your head around, but in general, Flexbox is pretty cool. The one thing that we always had problems when it came to CSS layouts was that we couldn't change the order. In Flexbox, we can totally change the order. That's something that we've wanted for so long. So let's say that I want this item to be the first one. There's a thing called, not that, there's a thing called order, and if I set this to 0 and I set this one to 1, you can see that the third one, and I set this one to 2, you can see that the third one is now the first one. So you can set all the orders that you want. If you want to change this on mobile, you can completely shift your design. So let's say if the thing you have in a row, the middle one is the one that you want to be at the top, you can totally do that without one single problem. I think this gives you a pretty good look at how Flexbox works. You can ask all the questions that you want at the end also, so no problem. I think this gives you a pretty good idea of how Flexbox works. And I'm just going to give you a little recap of the thing. Just give me a second. Okay, there we go. Flexbox recap. Okay, so Flexbox basically was a CSS module built specifically for helping you with layouts. It wasn't something like floats or stuff like that was just built for CSS in general. It was built specifically for layouts to help you build better layouts. Center alignment. This is something really important. This is something that we've wanted for years. So you can align things vertically and horizontally with 2 lines of code. That is really good. I think that is something that we've never had. We have order control. That's something that we've never had as well. Like, we could float things to the right instead of floating it to the left and create a reverse thing, but that was not order control. That was just being hacky. We need to remember that it's controlled by flex parents. So the grid is created by the flex parent, and if you want to target the item specifically, you can do that. And if you want the items to align all their content to the center, you need to create, the item needs to be a flex container. So you need to display flex to the item, and then do the align item center. Another thing that I think it's really important, I don't know if many of you work with RTL usually, but this is RTL compatible. We at Kaimo have a couple of ventures that use RTL, and this has been a huge lifesaver. RTL is always an issue, no matter how you tackle it. But if you use Flexbox and use margins that shift, so basically the default one is left, but when RTL is active, it changes to right, we haven't had any issues. So we have not one single line of RTL code so far. We're probably going to have, but right now, not one single line, and that's pretty good. So another module that has been around is CSS Grid. Sorry. CSS Grid came a little after Flexbox. Flexbox has actually been around for a couple of years. So I did a little checkup on CSS Grid a couple of months ago, and I think it's a pretty good thing. It has one major issue. It's not supported like pretty much at all. Like if you use IE, it's supported, but if you use IE, you're probably not going to use this. no. Chrome and Opera and Firefox, you can enable this through Flex. So you can test this around your house and just learn the basics of it, but it's going to take a couple of years before you can actually use this in the real world, like in the production environments or even for side projects. It's going to take a little while. So the idea of CSS Grid is that it was created for creating the grid in your design, like by what the name says. So Flexbox was created to help you it was created to help you with your layouts in general. So alignments and everything that you had in your layouts was helped by Flexbox. In the case of CSS Grid was created to help you do your own grid. So let's just get right into the code right here. Let me just, that was not the way, there we go. Okay, so the HTML in this page is pretty much the same. I have a couple more items, but the idea is pretty much the same. And then just put this a little bit bigger, there we go. And we're gonna go around CSS Grid and create a simple layout with CSS Grid. So let's say you want a header, a sidebar, and a content. We have a couple more items in here, but we'll get to that later. And you wanna use CSS Grid to do that. Okay, so you go to the container, and as previous, you say display grid. Okay, and as you can see, it's not as pretty as Flexbox by default. It doesn't do all the cool alignment stuff. You have to do that by creating a template of the rows and columns that you want. So basically, let's just say you want 3 columns. So in Chrome, you use grid, template columns, and you set the 3 values. So let me just set this to auto. And as you can see, by default, it gives you 3 columns, and the items that are left, it gives you rows. So that's pretty cool. But by now, you're probably already seeing a small issue in here, that you have to type every single column in there. If you have 10 columns, you probably have to type 10 columns. That's why they made a function to help you with this. So instead of using auto, you can just come here and say, repeat. There we go, the number of columns and how much you want. Let's just say I want 20% in each column, and I close this, and it works fine. It's a lot better than using auto. Okay, you get the point. You also can come here, grid template rows. Let's say repeat to 50 pixels or something like that. Okay. You may see the same issue as you've seen before. This is not aligned to the center. Good news, you can use the same thing as Flexbox. Align center. Everything becomes automatically aligned to the center. It counts how many columns you have, how much space they take, and it aligns everything to the center. Pretty cool. Okay, so that A, not really a header. The header is supposed to go all around. So let's come here to the A, and let's target this specific element, and let's say I want the grid column of this element to start at 1. 1 is the, okay, I can just use the mouse. 1 is here, and this is 2, 3, 4. Okay, 2, 3, 4. So I say grid column start, that's right here, and I say 1, and grid column ends, and I say 4. So as you can see, this automatically takes like the entire space of the row. That's pretty cool if you want to create these types of layouts. You also do not have to type grid column start and grid column end every time. You can just type grid column. Okay, and say 1, divide 4. And you can automatically delete this. Cool. That gives you a little bit more breathing room so you don't have to type that much. So now we have B, and we want B to be the sidebar. So we should change how that row works. So it should start at the 2nd row, that is right here in the start of B, and it should end at the 4th row, that is right here at the end of E. So let's dive into B, and let's say I want grid row start, and I want it to be 2, and grid row end, and I want it to be 4. This is because this is not actually doing like, it's because of the padding, because these all have 5 pixel of padding, so this is 2, so it has more padding than that one. You're gonna see that it eventually just works. So as you can see, easy, cool. But now you have 4 things and you want 1 content. Not pretty good. So let's just delete everything right here. So E, F, and D. and you want this one to be the content. So grid column 2, 4. Okay, not that. Okay. 2, 4. And it automatically becomes so A, B, and C. That's pretty good. Okay, I think that gives you a pretty good idea of how Flexbox works. Oh, sorry about that. Of how CSS Grid works. Let me just sit right here for a second. I think this gives you a pretty good idea of how CSS Grid works. Just gonna go back here to the slides. Play the slideshow. Okay, there we go. So, CSS Grid Recap. So CSS Grid was a CSS module built specifically for grid design. Unlike Flexbox that was built for everything, CSS Grid was built specifically for grid design. You also have order control. As you can see, I could set when the row starts, when the column starts, when the row ends, and stuff like that. So you have complete and utter order control. If you want, you can use one column to be the margin. So there's no need for more margins. You can just set one column to 10 pixels, and that column will be the margin. It's pretty cool. You can also name template areas if you want to get really deep into CSS Grid. You can also rename template areas and create like RC arts. So you can define it in there, but that's really hard to explain when in Chrome. So if you really want to get deep into that, you can check out Grid Template Areas. That's where you can rename and set all the row starts and row ends. By default, as you can, sorry, I didn't get to do this, but by default, this is also pretty responsive, as you can see. Okay, so this is basically the idea. I hope this gives you some outlook on how CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox works. Some ideas of how this works? Okay. This gives you a pretty good idea of how to get started in this. There's a lot more to cover. There's a lot more to see when it comes to Flexbox and CSS Grid. But I think this is something just to get you excited about the technology so you can look them up when you're at home or when you're starting a new project with CSS and you can remember, oh, I can use CSS Grid. In general, if you're starting a side project or something like that, you can use CSS Grid and just decay into IE9 and stuff like that using floats and stuff. And it could just work. You can remember this when you get home, and you can gonna keep CSS Grid in the back of your mind. So when it starts getting more adoption by browsers, you can start using it because it lets just. The idea is that you could choose one or the other, but the idea is that you create your grid using CSS Grid, and then you align everything using Flexbox. Because Flexbox is really good for alignments. Flexbox, when it comes to alignments, it gives you everything a perfect position without having to set anything in position absolute and having to ruin your layouts. It just helps you really, really good with this. And I think that's the idea. They complement each other. If you look at them really quickly, you're going to think that they overcompensate each other, but the idea is that they complement. So you use Grid for the basic grid layout, and then you use Flexbox to fill in that grid layout and create all your items and stuff like that. So that's what I had to talk to you about. I don't know how long it has been since I started talking, but this is pretty much the idea. I wanted to give you a quick introduction to CSS Grid and an introduction to Flexbox. Hope you enjoyed the Flexbox thing and the CSS Grid thing. I hope you remember this when you get home and start using this kind of technology so that when somebody at your job or somebody tells you to do a website, you're going to remember this, and then I swear to you, you're going to fall in love with Flexbox. You're also going to fall in love with CSS Grid, but they're not going to love you back because you can't use it. So what's the idea of loving something that doesn't love you back? Just going to get your heart broken. Don't do that. Pretty much it. Okay, you can leave your feedback in there. Sorry about that. Kind of forgot that was there. Okay, do you have any questions? Are you pretty hungry? Do you want to get to lunch? Everyone just wants to get to lunch, okay? Should have specifically ordered this time because I know that everyone just wants to go eat. It's like 1.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Which one would you recommend for a search result page or category page in an e-commerce site?
For a category, okay, actually I did the category page on the revamp. I used Flexbox because the way we used the category page was that, let's say you have 3 things in categories and they all should be the same height. That's also a problem we used to have with floats. This solves it with, Flexbox solves that. So it creates a row and all the rows are the same height. So all the margins like work. You don't have, so one category has 3 childs and the other one has 10. It doesn't do that weird thing, so it just does this and it works fine. So I will tell you to use Flexbox. I've used it and didn't have a problem with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.